Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and in today's video, we're updating my ultimate cavalry guide, giving you the best pairings, talents, equipment, formations and armaments, and more. And I recently did a video showcasing what I thought were the best open field marches that included cavalry, and that sparked a ton of conversation. So we're going to include all of that in this video as well. We're going to start with the best open field cavalry commanders and pairs. And man, we have got a lot to talk about. If I were to rank the best cavalry commanders today, I would say that Arthur is the number one for strength and potential. I would say probably Huo is number two for strength, not necessarily potential, but just strength. And then when we get to like number three and number four, it starts to sort of be a bit of a toss-up for like who we're talking about and at what power level. So if I filter by cavalry, our candidates for like 3 and 4 would probably be like Joan and Nevsky, right? As like the sort of next commanders we would look to in terms of power level. So if you're going to go and build one march, I made the argument that Huo pair with Arthur is a really, really strong way to go. However, I want to point something out. I want to point out that an Arthur primary can be very powerful as well. So if you were building one march and what you had was Wedge Armaments, I think the obvious play is the Huo with Arthur. But if you have the opportunity to build into the Delta formation, that opens up an entirely different possibility space. And for the last week, I just want to point this out. I have just been having incredible Sunset Canyon success in 2377, which is a very difficult kingdom. I mean, people have way better equipment and armaments than me. Case in point, Wild Lion, one of the strongest players in the game. And he was smashing into my team over and over. And I was winning. And then he switched to the team I'm using too. So he's like, okay, fine. That's the meta, I guess. And I think it is. Like, I think I didn't stumble upon it. I tested my way into sort of the Canyon defense meta. And in case you're wondering what it is, like, I think it's this over here. And I'm showing this to you because Arthur primary is what's run here and Philip is used as the secondary. And I figured this out over a week ago. I was like, man, Arthur Philip here seems to be really, really good. But as it turns out, Arthur Philip is also really, really good in the open field. I had some folks from 1960 message me and be like, hey, yo, I am crushing with this thing. And then I saw Sewell release a video earlier today, and he said, he's the king of 1960, and he said, yeah, no, Arthur Philip is the best cavalry march. So Arthur Philip, not only did I land on that over here, they've landed on that from open field. I think if you had the Delta armaments, then you could absolutely make the argument that your one and only march that you make for cavalry, if you're fielding only one, would be Arthur pair with Philip, which is kind of wild because like in the last month, they basically retired all the other cavalry if you have only one cavalry march and you're going this route. Okay. But I think that your next best option is Huo with Arthur, and that's really, really good. Arthur with Philip probably ends up being your best option, weirdly enough, for one single cavalry march, assuming you're not going to put your Philip somewhere else. And I have plans to put him somewhere else. All right. Now, to talk more about multiple pairs of cavalry, I feel like the tool to use here is Tier Maker. So let's jump into a tier list so we can show all the different combos and what we're really talking about here. All right. So if we're going the route of the Arthur primary, Philip secondary, which not a lot of people can do, by the way, but if you've got the Delta armament and we're headed in this direction, what then becomes the next best pair to use? And I talked about which commanders sort of have the most power level. I've surfaced to the top here the different cavalry commanders that we might consider. We're not talking about an artifact KVK where you can switch around the troop type, right? Then I think Huo is really strong, and you're either going to pair with Joan for AoE or Nevsky, right? In this instance. And I think this feels like a very powerful way to go. I also really like William. He's got instant proc damage. He generates a lot of rage. I like that rage generation because I find that when I'm going back and forth in a fight, I can probably stay in combat And what happens is that William as a secondary will use his active skill. You step away and your rage is ticking up, ticking up, ticking up, so that when you go back into the fight again, boom, you're ready to use your active skills very quickly again. I like that. But some combination of those cavalry ends up being the best. And I would honestly put Nevsky to the back of this sort of configuration because single target damage is not my preference for a big fight. Like if you know 100% guaranteed you're landing the AoE, William AoE is pretty good. And in big fights, that's what's happening. Small fights, different story, totally different story, right? But you know you're going to get your AoE with your Joan. You know you're going to get your AoE with your William. In that context, I think that they work really well. So that would be the sort of configuration I would run if I was doing 2 marches and I'm having an Arthur primary. And don't worry, we're going to do this whole thing all over again if you're not going to run an Arthur primary and you don't have the Delta stuff, all right? Which brings us now to, what about a 3rd march? If I'm going to run a 3rd march, what's it going to be? And you have some options. We talked about this in my video for like what I might do if I were running this, because I don't have Justinian. I do have Belly Prime. When I talked about this with someone from 2489, they were recommending Justinian and then also pairing with William. And there's a bunch of instant proc damage there, which is what makes that kind of work. I don't have the Justinian, and I also feel like I'd love to get Belly Prime into this lineup if I'm bringing 3 cavalry. So I personally probably take the Justinian out of that setup. And then it's a question of like, okay, well, who's a better secondary? Who's a better primary? I probably... See, I'm inclined to do something like this. Joan with Belly Prime and Huo with William. But here's the thing. I know from personal experience that Joan with Belly Prime sucks. I don't know why. I found the reports to be awful. Like, it just sucked to use. Whereas Huo with Belly Prime seemed to work. So, like, I probably end up somewhere like this. If you're going to run Arthur and you're going to be a 3 cav guy and Arthur's the primary, this is probably how I end up doing things. And again, like, you also could have this Justinian that works as a primary, and I think that could be pretty good. I don't think we bring in XY. I don't think we bring in Attila. We're not bringing in the new Cav Rally. This is how I probably would suggest it at this point, especially after all this conversation we've been having and feedback I've been getting after my last video. Holy smokes. So if you were to run, however, with no Delta formation armaments, and you're like, Chis, I'm getting to 3 cav marches, but I don't have the Delta stuff. What do I do? Then we get a look at who is going to be a primary, okay? And I think if you're running 1 march, we know it looks like this. If you're running 2 marches, I think you just bring in the Nevsky Joan, and that's where we're at. I just really found the Joan primary, Belly Prime secondary to not cut it. And I can't exactly explain to you why, but the reports just weren't there. So I think you end up doing Nevsky Joan, or if you wanted, you could do Nevsky William, right? It depends on what you have. I'll give you options here. And then if you're getting to 3 marches, how would I run this? Holy cow. I think what you do, if you don't have any of the armaments here for this, is that you bring these guys in. Again, you could pull in a Justinian as a primary. We could talk about that in a second. But I think you use Huo with Arthur, because that march does so much damage. You would use Nevsky probably with William. I mean, it's a bummer, but you can't put the William and the Joan together. They're too squishy. So I think you have to go like this, and then you do the Joan with the Belly Prime. And like, I don't know if we assume that you're running Philip somewhere or not. Like, Philip Joan is like not amazing either. It doesn't have the tankiness that it needs there. So I just don't know that this is where I would be putting the Philip at that point. So you probably end up with something like this. But again, you know, I don't particularly like this combo if you're running 3. Wow. And, you know, there is the option of the Justinian. If he's a primary, now you've got some interesting options depending on your philosophy about Belly. You could run it maybe like this or like this. Something like that. will be the way to go. You know, I almost forgot this, and I'm going to have to edit it in, which is that there is another way we can think about running with Arthur, and that is as a secondary to Nevsky. And I've heard from some people, they're like, no, this is better than the Huo army. And it's like, there's so many opinions, right? So if you're on the Nevsky primary, Arthur secondary plan, then your second march probably ends up being Huo with Joan. And at that point, if you're doing a third march, I'm not entirely sure what you need to do. You got to split the Joan again. Maybe you bring in the belly. And then from there, like Joan William, but that's so squishy. That thing is going to get cooked. I don't know if you're putting Philip over here, but I would not say that this is optimal either. I definitely would not say that that's optimal. Yeah, you get into kind of a weird spot if you're going to go to 3, right? But if you're doing 2, like I think that could be a reasonable way to run things, right? So I'm mentioning this for posterity that there are people who swear to me that using the Nevsky and Arthur is the better way to go, and then the rest of your marches you could do some other stuff with. I would believe it. I haven't tested enough to demonstrate that is necessarily the case, or had the open field experience to prove that, but I think you could also be perfectly happy running it in that way. So that covers your cavalry pairs, right? The TLDR of it, though, is that as it turns out, weirdly enough, Delta formation plus Philip plus Arthur seems to have totally upended what is your best cavalry march. And I think that also Huo with Arthur is insane. It's very, very good. And you can be very happy running that. Most people are only running 2 cavalry marches at this point. And I will also add that, in my opinion, with the way that the game is designed now, I wouldn't go more than 2 of any troop type at this point. 2 infantry, 2 archer, 2 cavalry, and a siege or a leadership march would be the way to go. And these days it feels more and more like a siege march is the way to go rather than a leadership march. But, you know, Philip primary, I think there's some really cool stuff you can do. And I'm really eager to see if and when they add another commander that's like Trajan, but better than Trajan. Like, I need another Philip. Another commander that does a big buff would be really, really cool. I don't think I've seen anybody test Philip William with Echelon, which I think is a hilarious curiosity. But if you had Echelon and you had the Cav gear, talented leadership, which maybe Ark of Osiris people do, I actually think there's something you could maybe do there. But I don't know. My crazy theories, I just want to label that as a crazy theory, not a thing that has actually been proven or tested. But I don't know. Buffing everything like crazy is probably not bad. And the only issue is, you know, these days, I think it's worth calling out that the power level of William is just not what it once was, right? Like if somebody said, should I go start working on William now? You know, from my investment tier list, the answer is no. In fact, from my investment tier list, the commanders that I thought for cavalry that were worth investing in are there and there, right? Like it's Arthur and it's Huo. And like those are the ones that are worth starting an investment in now. And Huo is also like maybe an on the way out commander, but certainly not for another, let's call it 9 to 12 months, depending on when we would get the next cycle of cavalry. At this point, I think it's really clear that whether or not you've worked on the Delta formation is very, very critical. And Arthur needs to be the primary to do the combo stuff rather than the wedge stuff. And I think that over time, being able to field this Delta formation is going to be a huge advantage. I don't think it's critical until 9 to 12 months from now, when presumably then we get combo in the open field again, and it becomes very, very powerful. But if you're to start to work on the Delta formation today, what would I say is a priority? And I've mentioned this in some of my formation videos, but I would say butterfly effect is the #1 priority, or the rare inscription in this same slot. Why is that? This gives you a chance to trigger your things that can be triggered by launching basic attacks, and it elevates it, right? So it goes from, let's say you have a 10% chance to do instant proc damage, it elevates it by 20% to then make it a 30% chance. And I talked to support, that's how it works. It doesn't go from 10% to 12%, okay? It goes from 10% to 30%. It's insane. So this is an additive boost, I guess is the way to describe that, right? Which is way better, like way better. So this is really good. If you didn't have that, which a lot of people will not, obviously, you go down here and the blue armament is also very, very good, causative. Boosts your combo attack damage, and combo attacks launched by their trooper 8% more likely. I mean, not bad, right? So like that's the priority you would want to put on this army, okay? And with regard to everything else, weirdly enough, I think that in time, the KVK inscription will be very good. But for now, it's not necessarily. What do I mean by that? So if we go back to the Codex, if you win KVK, should you get Thrasher? And it's like, well, there's two problems with this. First of all, it only boosts combo damage dealt, which like you only have one combo damage dealer, which is not amazing. And second of all, this is something that needs to stack up, which in back and forth fighting, as long as you stay in combat, it will, but it might not. So I don't think until we get like 2 combo commanders, I just don't think this is the priority. Same is probably true with Pummeler, right? Like, I don't think that this is the priority yet. I think it will be, but not yet. The same is true of this over here, Flurry and Relentless. I don't think these are the priority yet. Your next best priority is over here. If you can get your hands on Steel Skin, this to me feels insane. Unlike the KVK inscription, which is dependent on sort of doing combo damage to boost combo damage. Here, you deal combo damage to reduce damage taken. That's way, way, way easier. Like, the benefit here is immediate. Even if you were to leave combat, stacking up damage taken reduction is totally different and very powerful. This is also damage resistance up top, which is extremely powerful. Determined is 1.5% damage resistance. Also really, really good. And Arthur urgently needs damage taken reduction. He's very squishy, in my opinion. He is a squishy commander to bring, and I don't know why. Like, it feels like that shouldn't be the case, but it is the case. So anything you can do to make him more tanky would be the priority. The other thing you can do, obviously, is to use the arch stuff. And like, I wouldn't be looking at something like destructive, but just sticking with arch as a formation, boosting normal attack damage, which in turn then enhances your combo attack damage, I think is a fine way to go, okay? I would say that the arch stuff is generally better suited to smite damage. And I do sort of wonder, by the way, what infantry we'll get in the future, but topic for a separate video, okay? So those would be the priorities if you're going in on this Delta formation. If you're doing Wedge, then things get kind of interesting here. I mean, obviously, I feel like Hunter is incredibly powerful with commanders like Huo and Nevsky, but also, obviously, you're trying to do more area of effect damage. So this is not as powerful with area of effect damage, but it is very good. I think the best thing you can get hands down is Intrepid. This is just insane. Like, if you were prioritizing getting something for Wedge and you were all in on that plan, this right here is the moneymaker, in my opinion, right? Focus Fire is fine, but Intrepid is insane. I also feel like Balance is just fine. When you get to 80% rage, the troop deals 8% more skill damage for the next 3 seconds. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe you get the benefit of this for the active skill of the primary commander, but probably not also the secondary commander. Aspirationally, you would. And normal damage resistance is fine. I mean, it helps you with combo. That helps you with smite. It helps you with taking normals. I mean, I think it's pretty legit, but the prio, in my opinion, is over here on Intrepid. All right? And that is just really good. I don't particularly like Defiant. Normal damage resistance. Okay. I feel like skill damage commanders should be about amplifying your skill damage. Boiling Blood is really good. I like that one. That's pretty solid. Craze giving you rage. This is a weird one. This is really good on Joan, I suppose, right? Whenever you deal direct damage, gain 35 rage, cooldown of 2 seconds. It'd be good there. Anyways, let's jump back over here. And we've talked about armaments. We've talked about how I think Delta is a good long-term plan. And if you wanted to get to that plan, by the way, and you have the stones that switch an armament from one formation to another, your best bet, in my opinion, is to double down on whatever formation you have that's closest to Pity. Get those armaments, get those armaments, get those armaments. And ideally, like, it's Wedge, because you have a Wedge, set of armaments for 3 troop types, presumably. And then switch something over. to Delta when you're ready. That could be expensive, but like, I feel like that's a more efficient way of doing it than just starting to open Delta. And, you know, you only get a relevant armament if you win the 1 and 4 on Cav stats, right? Whereas it's a 3 and 4, sort of. I mean, I don't know. What do we count all the yellow stuff as? We call it, you know, infantry, archers, cavalry, absolute trash, and siege, right? Like, anyways, this video is so long, I almost forgot about talents. Let me just show these to you very briefly. The talent build I'm currently using on Arthur looks like this. I think this is good for Canyon. You could debate swapping off some of these points for march speed, arguably. That would be perfectly reasonable. But this is the build I'm using on my Arthur when he's the primary. For most Cav stuff, though, you're just looking at this build over here. This is the tried and true. Everybody's been running it for ages. Best open field Cav build. And I don't even know that there's that much to talk about. Like, you get extra rage, faster active skill activations, and you need to survive, so you reduce the skill damage you take, which has only gotten weaker as a talent point over time, given that now we have combo and smite damage, but it is what it is, and true damage. And Undying Fury generates rage. And like, there you go. Don't use William as the primary. If you're using Joan as the primary, fair ask. Here's a build you could run. You could definitely make the argument that you should, instead of having only 2 points over here, have 3. But the 2 points over here in Rejuvenate is very, very, very intentional. The reason is that you only need so much rage per turn to max out the amount of rage you can generate. That cap in a single turn is 220. And reductions to rage happen after cap. In other words, if you went over 220, your rage gets put back to down to 220, then reductions happen. So long story short, 2 points here is very intentional. You could make an argument for the sort of pure field, slow the enemies build, which would look sort of like this. But I think those are the only Cav builds we need to talk about. GG. As actually, I thought this section would be a lot longer than it is, but nope, I think we covered it. Let's talk about equipment, okay? Equipment for cavalry, your main goal is to move into all of the amazing health stuff that they get. And this really differentiates cavalry, that they have so many options for health that other troop types don't have. The main ways that you're getting that, by the way, is from Ash of the Dawn, very powerful, and also Navarre's Control, which amazingly, these are very accessible in Lucerne Scrolls, and also from the Crystal Keys. Really powerful to be able to gain access to these in such an easy way. From there, you want the set chest, and you really want the set boots, which also, by the way, have health, which is just insane. So you stack so much health here, and defense is going to be amazing on this helmet, and the weapon you're going to do as a part of a set bonus. I like the 4-piece set bonus, or if you want, you move in the direction, and I don't know if I actually even have this equipped, but you would go in the direction of having the KVK helmet and the KVK weapon. And I will shift over to using those soon. I'm going to bring up the iconic tier on them, and then it will actually make sense to swap. For now, it doesn't, because the iconic tiers are super relevant, and you obviously need to get a lot of currency to go upgrade those particular items, all right? So in terms of accessories, here's where things get really interesting. I really like Ring and Horn. For pretty much every Cav March, like, Ring and Horn is very good. Horn generates rage, Ring helps you deal damage, and all of these get more chances to trigger because of combo. So if you are using an Arthur primary, I think those are really good. I do think there's some interesting things that can be done with Dagger and Web with combo. However, I will point out that I'm not using them, and I probably bring these in my perfect world as like swap-ins when you're swarming a garrison potentially, because at that point you've got literally 12 total armies, including the rally, benefiting from this, right? Or if you're swarming a rally, right? All the armies swarming the rally benefit from those debuffs. The scale of that is undeniable. But for pure fielding, I think these days consensus is moving more and more in the direction of just Horn and Ring, and like, I think that's reasonable. Those are the recommendations I've got for you. In fact, hilariously, combo, people are wondering now, should I craft? This is so insane. I can't believe we're going to talk about this. People are starting to wonder, should I go back and craft the epic accessory that reduces rage, Silent Trial? Because every hit is going to reduce rage, and that actually gets really insane. Like, think about it. The active skill of Arthur, hitting 3 things twice, I mean, 60 rage reduction. The combo attack stuff is nuts. And this triggers whatever you launch any type of basic. No internal cooldown. Anyways, I mentioned this in part because if you care about Cav and you're just getting started and you're interested in Arthur weirdness, and like, this is something you totally could consider crafting in the early game, right? Now, in terms of other like early game cavalry gear priorities, there's a couple things that I want to talk about. What I want to mention is that you always want to be in health as a priority over defense, defense as a priority over attack. So anytime you see an upgrade that takes you from, you know, being in attack to defense, that should be a priority for you. So as you look at the gear over here and you start in like the Expedition Warhelm, upgrading to an Abyssal Visage is actually not a high priority because this is going to give you more stats, but it's attack. And so I would argue even that a talented Expedition Warhelm ends up being better than the Abyssal Visage before talent. You see what I mean? So yes, eventually more stats is definitely just better, but I will argue for health over defense, defense over attack, generally speaking. So when we get a look at the chess piece over here, you've got Cavalry Defense and the Dark Lord's Blessing. That's going to last you a while. Way better than the Windswept that you're upgrading from. Better than the Milanese, if that's where you're sort of using at the start. For the gloves, you can use this right here, a Set Sufferance, for a very, 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 very long time. It's got health and attack. Insane. In fact, going to the legendary gloves is just giving you the opportunity of having iconic tiers and switching a small amount of attack to a small amount of health. Right? Like, a Set Sufferance is a really top tier piece. You'll use that for a long time. I really like Gladiator for obvious reasons. 8% health is very, very good. In terms of other stuff you're using, yeah, I mean, you're probably for a long time using Vanguard Greaves with this weapon over here, Vanguard Halberd. Obviously very, very good. Eventually, you'll switch to the Epic, which, amazingly, I don't have the materials to forge, but jumping up to this defense is a nice boost, especially when you get this talented, right? When you have the patterns and the gold, totally worth. For boots over here, interestingly, for all other troop types, I would say boots are a high priority, and you want to push iconic tier for march speed, but for cavalry, that's the last troop type I'm pushing march speed on because they're already so fast because they're cavalry. And Cav attack kind of sucks on these boots. So upgrading from, you know, Cloud Racers to Set boots is something you want to do very fast. Dude, I mean, going from attack to health, huge W. Huge W. Yeah, I feel like that'd be a pretty big change there. All right. So we've covered a bunch of stuff. We've talked about commanders. We've talked about equipment. We've talked about formations. We've talked about pairs. We've talked about investment order, even potentially, that Arthur is your top investment over here for cavalry and who will be your next best. And like, I suppose I even should have considered like Philip in that conversation, because if we're talking about Philip and considering him a cavalry commander with versatility, then I would say like your number 1 is Arthur, your number 2 is Philip, if you've got this Delta stuff that you can work with, right? And then your number 3 would be Huo in that context. Kind of wild. Man, yeah, kind of wild. Couple shout outs I want to give at the end of this video here for, we'll call it inspiration. Had a lot of debate with Ruz, Cortex, and Chadsky about cavalry. I had Minty and a bunch of other people message me saying, hey, no, don't you dare do Nevsky dirty. Nevsky primary, Arthur secondary is the way. And like, I respect it. I haven't done that other than like, you know, some testing with it. But again, I'll emphasize the synergy there is that Nevsky uses an active skill, okay? And then you get 35% more bonus to skill damage. And then Arthur just absolutely slaps, right? Huge skill damage coming out of him. And then on top of that, I will point out that Arthur urgently needs someone tanky to pair with. Nevsky's very tanky. So like, the synergy there makes sense. I can see why that would be good. Talked a ton with Amfern from 2489 about different cavalry combos that he had experienced in the open field. And we arrived at some really good conclusions over there about the sort of need to pair tanky commanders with certain other commanders, like how Joan and like William, etc. just really need someone like Nevsky to pair with them. Even Arthur, like I'm going to use Arthur primary and probably Nevsky secondary as an option here. That's like tanky, and I'm only running 2 cavalry marches. So it's like a thing I could go and do. I have so much I need to test still. There's a ton of shout outs that I feel like I want to do here. I don't want to miss anybody. I feel like those were the main influences. And I mentioned earlier that I checked out Sewell's video earlier today, and he was like, hey, you should use Arthur as the primary and Philip as the secondary. And like, okay, when 1960 says this is what you should use, I mean, probably should listen to that. There we go. I think we cited all our sources. I think we did it. I feel like Omniarch does a good job of citing sources, and it always just makes him look more knowledgeable. So shout out to all my sources in this video. Chi. Holy cow. All right. There we go. I have spent way too much time thinking and talking about cavalry over the last week. It's kind of insane. Leave your video ideas down below. I want to talk about something else. What are we going to go talk about? Drop your comments down below for the next Rise of Kingdoms vid. Maybe it's going to be a stream with like, I don't know. Maybe we'll get an egg event this weekend. We'll see. Subscribe. Drop a like and a comment. Until next time, you have fun, smash your enemies, and check out my video with my recommendations for just all the open field stuff. What are your 7 marches going to be? 5 marches going to be? 3 marches going to be? That video will be right over here.